You think you know Kody Brown? Think twice, because under all the shirts, the cameras, and the carefully constructed image of a man juggling four marriages is something no one ever really questioned, until now. A necklace, or better said, a series of them. Unassuming at first glance, leather cords, metallic pendants, some random shapes that appeared to switch depending on the season. But to fans who paid attention, those necklaces weren't merely about style. They were communications, subtle, symbolic, and eerily coincidental. And if you look far enough back, really far enough back, each sweeping change in Kody's relationships seemed to show up just after a new necklace did. Coincidence? Or was Kody wearing his truth before anyone else could see it? Tonight, we're decoding the hidden story that dangled just below his collarbone. The story that might reveal who Kody Brown really is when the cameras stop rolling. Because once the sister wives saw those necklaces for what they meant, nothing about their family ever felt the same again. And if you find that surprising, just wait until you find out what happened afterwards. Kody Brown has never been more than the man at the eye of a stormy reality series. To some, he's an icon of resistance, a man who dared live in opposition to the norm in the spotlight. To others, he's the figurehead of a falling empire, a family torn asunder by faith, freedom, and frustration. But there's one aspect that's gone unnoticed with him all along, something so tiny yet so relentless, that it became an extension of himself well before people even began to pay attention. His necklaces? At first, they were innocuous, a bit rugged, a bit bohemian, the kind of thing a desert-living family man might sport in the Arizona sun. But over time, fans caught on. These necklaces weren't so random after all. They shifted as things shifted in Kody's life. In the early days in Lehi, his necklaces were understated, natural, almost humble, earthy colors and soft lines that spoke to a man committed to his faith and family. But with the rise of fame came an increase in the glitz. Leather gave way to metal. Crosses and charms became odd geometric pendants, each new one emerging right before some dramatic change in the family structure. The relocation to Las Vegas, the increasing space between wives, the tension that no one dared mention. And then, the new era dawned, the Robyn era, where Kody's necklaces suddenly acquired a more angular, more aggressive tone. That's when people began questioning. What did they signify? Were they connected to his ideology, or symbols of control, identity, or transformation? Forums blazed, Reddit threads imploded. Some fans were certain they saw a pattern, others dismissed it as overthinkery. But the timing could not be denied, because each time Kody put on something new to decorate his neck, something else would malfunction in the family. And while everyone was looking at the wives, trying to interpret how they felt, Kody's necklaces were telling a story of their own, a tale of change, ego, and a man rewriting the rules for power when love began to fizzle. And if you believed those initial clues were odd, wait until we discover what those patterns actually meant, and why some of the wives couldn't take it anymore. The more you dig, the more it becomes apparent. Kody Brown's necklaces were not merely jewelry, they were statements. Every one of them appeared to have a message, meaning, or even warning, concealed in plain sight. The first actual clue came when followers of Kody spotted a tiny metal pendant in the form of a twisted infinity symbol. It wasn't gaudy, but it came on the heels of a dramatic family breakdown, the season when Christine started emotionally cutting herself off from Kody. Some interpreted it as a symbol of his eternal family belief, but others viewed it as a desperate plea to himself that dominance would never end. Next was the circular pendant, smooth, reflective, like a mini shield. He wore it on interviews in which he discussed protecting the family name. Coincidence? Perhaps, but to the wives it seemed symbolic of something else, a wall. A barrier of protection between Kody and the people he once said he loved equally. Later, a darker pendant appeared, an abstract triangle made of iron, almost harsh in its design. It emerged around the same time his tone on the show shifted. The tenderness faded. The leader persona hardened. He started talking about loyalty, hierarchy, and obedience. And that triangle, it mirrored a power dynamic, one man at the top, three women below. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Behind each symbol lay a deeper narrative, one of religion, narcissism, and self-folding in the heat of the cameras. Some fans thought Kody's actions were spiritual iconography, veiled references to ancient religious concepts of patriarchy and hierarchy. Others thought them personal, emotional shields that enabled him to rationalize the mess around him. What made the whole thing so chilling was the way those necklaces came to weigh more and more. Not in the physical sense, but in the emotional sense, as if each one bore the load of a broken relationship he couldn't repair, a vow he couldn't fulfill. And just when things couldn't get any more intimate, the wives started noticing too. Their responses weren't boisterous or melodramatic, not yet, but their eyes said it all. Because once they began to wonder what those symbols actually meant, the tale of the sister wives took a turn no one could have anticipated. The initial reactions weren't reactions from interviews or confessionals, they were reactions from looks, steady, short glances that lasted just long enough for viewers to see, but too short for Kody ever to catch. Mary was the first to notice it. She'd always had knowledge of Kody's little foibles, the new jackets, the hairstyles, the fads. But this one was different. The day he came in swinging that big metal pendant, she regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and worry. There was something odd about it. Not merely the style but the vibe that went with it. Like Kody was attempting to communicate without words. Janelle saw it too, but she dismissed it initially. Practical to the core, she wasn't in the habit of reading things into jewelry. Even she would, however, later say that it appeared to signal a change, a new subtle edge in Kody's confidence, perhaps even defiance. Christine, however, was unable to conceal her look. When Kody first emerged, dressed in what fans would come to refer to as the triangle necklace, her eyes flashed downwards, and then upwards again, with stunned incredulity. She didn't say a word, but the silence told it all. It was the sort of silence that conveyed years of emotional burnout. A woman observing a man she'd once loved become a man she hardly knew anymore. And then there was Robyn, the newest wife, the one who always appeared to grasp Kody's symbolism. She smiled when she saw it. Not a polite, obligatory smile, but something knowing, almost proud. As if she grasped what the necklace meant, even before anyone else. In vintage footage, those moments are simple to overlook, but watch them again now, and it's all there. The tension, the unease, the unspoken words between them. The necklaces became quiet indicators of where each relationship stood. And if you thought those initial reactions were subtle, wait until you see how those little glances became in-depth conversations, tearful confrontations, and ultimately the emotional breakdown that revealed what those necklaces truly meant to each of them. Time has a way of making the minute's details seem gargantuan, and for the sister wives, what initially appeared to be innocent jewelry gradually became a symbol that they could no longer turn a blind eye to. It began quietly, quiet references in interviews, a joke half made here, a wistful remark there. But under their smiles, something else: contemplation. For now, years down the line, those necklaces weren't merely embellishments in dated footage, they were hints at a mystery that each woman had endured. Christine was the first to really speak about it. In a subsequent interview, when queried concerning Kody's changing energy, she hesitated for quite a while before she said, "You can tell a lot about someone by what they choose to wear." Her voice was level, but her eyes were laced with meaning. Fans knew precisely what she was saying. To her, those necklaces symbolized Kody's gradual evolution, from a man of mutual aspirations to one who had to wear his control, even in tokens. Mary, returning to earlier episodes, confessed something gentler, that she felt left out of the significance. "Sometimes I questioned if those necklaces were supposed to be for us to see," she said, "or for him to remind himself of the kind of person he wanted to be." Her words were laced with that soft pain she's become famous for, the hurt of being near someone but never quite in their universe. Janelle's insight came from pragmatism, as ever. She explained that she didn't perceive the necklaces as symbols of power, but as Kody's way of centering himself. Even she recognized, though, that each new necklace appeared to come at a fresh level of emotional disconnection. And Robyn, she came to their defense. She explained that the jewelry symbolized spiritual protection, something special between her and Kody, something misinterpreted by the rest of the world. But this defense only served to bolster the other wives' interpretation. In combination, their words created a picture of four very disparate experiences: love, disconnection, protection, and suffering, all centered on the same insignificant small thing. But what if those necklaces were never random at all? What if they were the thread that quietly sewed Kody's changing story together, even as everything around them was breaking apart? And if you think you've heard the complete story, wait and see, because the hidden force behind those necklaces might be the most revealing chapter of all. When you pull back and look at the timeline, an odd pattern emerges. Each significant turn in the sister wives narrative, each crack of emotion, each confession, each public turning point, appears to coincide with the introduction of a new necklace, as if Kody's jewelry decisions weren't tracking the story, but guiding it. To everyone else, it was invisible. But to the audience who watched more than a decade, it started to resemble a breadcrumb trail. Every pendant a new page of Kody's identity. The necklaces were not just echoes of fashion, they were echoes of power. And that subtle influence defined the way the audience perceived him, even when he wasn't talking. When Kody sported the circle pendant, his interviews were about unity and protecting the family. He talked like a guardian of something delicate. But when the triangle came out, his language changed. He sounded more incisive, more dominating, blaming the wives for the alienation that he himself used to facilitate. The symbol reflected the tone, pungent, split, and burdened. And that's where the true power dwelled, not in the thing itself, but in the message it conveyed. A quiet implicit means for Kody to script his story, to remind himself and all who watched that he was still the star. By design or not, those necklaces were effective shields, tangible evidence that he was clinging, even as the rest of his world disintegrated. The irony naturally is that the necklaces probably told us more than they kept under wraps. As the season progressed, so did Kody's public persona, from patriarch unfairly maligned to conflicted guy, from leader to loner. And those necklaces, once assumed to be signs of faith or fortitude, came to seem like emblems of something else altogether: weakness. A man clinging to meaning as best he could. For the wives, it came slowly, over years of loss and suffering. For the audience, it came from rewatching scenes that once seemed mundane, but now throb with secret significance. And for Kody, perhaps it hasn't arrived at all. Because the truth is, symbols only have power when we assign them meaning. And perhaps Kody's necklaces were never faith, control, or love. Perhaps they were how he broadcast to the world that he was still the author of his own life, even when the world around him was re-authoring their own. And in that quiet, everything shifted. But the one question that still remains unanswered is the one no one can answer. Were Kody's necklaces merely a reflection of what he was, or a confession of who he was becoming? What do you think they were trying to say? In all long stories, there comes a moment when things cease to be objects and become memories. For the sister wives, Kody's necklaces have crossed that threshold long ago. What used to be some quirky little detail of their daily existence has become something far denser, a reminder of all that was said and all that wasn't. Christine once revealed in an off-camera interview that she doesn't recall the time that Kody removed one of those necklaces for the final time, but she recalls the sensation. The air was distinct, softer, lighter. It was like some intangible weight had been removed from the room. And perhaps that was symbolic as well. The time she released the narrative she'd been attempting to keep intact. Mary, on the other hand, continues to discuss finding meaning in little things. A person folding a shirt, the sound of their voice, the accessories they wear. She explained that to her, the necklaces are now symbolic of something bittersweet. They remind me of all the times I tried to understand him, when maybe I was supposed to understand myself. Janelle, the pragmatist, put it best in a subsequent season. She referred to them as distraction. Blunt, nearly cavalier, but burdened with reality. To her, the necklaces weren't mystery or mystique. They were manifestations of Kody's restlessness, evidence that even in the company of people who adored him, he was still looking for something beyond himself. And Robyn, she still regards the necklaces as sacred. To her, they were gifts of faith, protection symbols, things she and Kody shared in intimate moments the world wouldn't ever get. Perhaps that's why she still stands up for them. Because in her narrative, those pieces symbolize love, not loss. When you combine all those viewpoints together, something amazing happens. The necklaces cease to be about metal or leather or symbols. They become mirrors, each reflecting a different iteration of the same man, through the eyes of four women who each loved him differently. And that's the understated irony of it all. Kody's necklaces were never about him. They became a metaphor for everyone's path, how love changes, how faith shatters, how meaning lies in plain sight. Perhaps that's the reason why fans can't help but mention them even today. Because, at some level, those necklaces were not merely a part of an act, they were a part of an evolution, one that altered the way millions perceived the Brown family, and the way the family perceived themselves. All stories have their symbols. Some are inscribed in stone, others quietly dangle around somebody's neck, reflecting bits of light only when the camera is turned just so. For Kody Brown, those necklaces are more than jewelry. They're relics of a life lived on public display. Each one a snapshot, a moment in time in a narrative that was never so much about love as it was the challenge to define what love is when too many hearts are at stake. When the cameras cut off and the lights die, the jewelry is left behind, hidden in drawers, boxed up, perhaps even lingering in the depths of a closet. But for viewers who saw each episode, each fight, each sobbed-out revelation, those necklaces still have a voice. They speak softly of change, of ego, of heartbreak, and the long journey from togetherness to disconnection. Consider it, in the early seasons, those necklaces had appeared to be full of hope. They glimmered in the desert sun, reminders of faith, family, and a dream that Kody desired the world to witness. But in the latter seasons, they had grown to have another shine to them, harsher, heavier, nearly shield-like armor for a man to battle with against the very family he created. And the wives as well discovered their meanings there. Christine, control; Mary, distance; Janelle, distraction; Robyn, devotion. And somewhere between all of those definitions is the truth. A truth never uttered, perhaps, but one that exists in the subtle facts of their collective past. Because sometimes the most deafening stories aren't spoken, they're spoken in movement, in a look, in what one decides to put on when the world is holding its breath. Perhaps the necklaces were never intended to be interpreted. Perhaps they were Kody's means of keeping something holy, a personal creed that even as everything else fell apart, he could still call his own. Perhaps they were mere pieces of a man attempting to make sense of things in the midst of turmoil. And that's the haunting beauty of it all. The way a simple piece of metal can carry a decade's worth of emotion. The way one man's accessories became the family's mirror. So now, as fans continue to re-watch, analyze, and debate, one question remains, not about the show, but about us. Why do we see so much of ourselves in the symbols other people wear? Is it because, at the end of the day, we're all just seeking our own purpose in the stories that we share, or the stories that we leave? There is a peculiar sort of power in objects, those that we wear, those that we carry close. And for Kody Brown, those necklaces were more than mere fashion trends. They were shields for the emotions. Each pendant, each bead, each personally designed charm held a secret message. To the world, they seemed like identity symbols. But to those who really knew him, or believed they did, they were reminders, limits, and signs of control. It wasn't jewelry, it was wordless communication. Behind closed doors, out of shot, Kody would frequently grab hold of those necklaces. Before heading into contentious discussions, he'd fiddle with them, half-consciously, as if someone getting ready for battle. As if he thought those adornments contained the equilibrium of his leadership, his reputation, his tentative ego, and yet, the wives saw. They always did. Christine once attested to in a confession, he wears that thing like it gives him power. She was not joking. For her, it was not about the metal or the symbol, it was about the way it affected him. And that's what hurt the most, because every time he put one on, it felt like a reminder of the space between them, the Kody in his head, and the Kody in their world. The necklaces had evolved into something more profound, an impenetrable wall. Mary knew it too, although she never spoke of it. Her silence was testimonial enough. She'd sit there, her eyes heavy, looking on while he'd fiddle with the chain as he explained family unity, or spiritual connection. The irony wasn't lost to her. The symbol of connection had become the evidence of separation. And as for Robyn, well, the tale was not the same. To her, the necklaces were holy. She felt they symbolized Kody's allegiance to something above and beyond all of them, a belief greater than each of them. But eventually, even she could not deny how the significance changed. The burden of symbolism was too much to bear. By the time the family broke apart, those necklaces had seen it all. Love, control, jealousy, quiet despair. They had become the uncomplaining witnesses to a story that had transcended its script. And perhaps that's why, even today, they remain relevant. because when viewers zoom in on vintage clips and see Kody wearing a certain necklace prior to a big fight, or while making a heartfelt confession, they're not simply observing fashion choices, they're observing patterns, emotional patterns. The necklaces tell their own story of sister wives, not the one produced by TLC, not the one crafted by confessionals or storylines, but the unedited, unvarnished one, a tale of symbolism, insecurity, and quiet power. And if you believe that's all they stood for, wait until you hear what went down when one of them vanished. It began quietly, no loud music, no fiery argument, just a regular filming day, until Kody realized something was missing. One of his necklaces, the one he always wore, the one fans had learned to expect, had disappeared. He dismissed it as an error at first. Perhaps it had been dropped in the trailer, or lost somewhere in one of the production boxes. But the manner in which he looked, desperate, rattled, even paranoid, sent the entire room into a silent pause, because this wasn't just an adornment to him. It was his emblem of equilibrium, his armor of the unseen. Without it, something changed in him. Cameras captured bits of the tension, fast cuts, uncomfortable silences, sideways glances from the wives. TLC never broadcast those bits, but individuals who attended still recall. The air was thick. Christine was the first to realize. She leaned over and whispered in Janelle's ear, "He's not wearing it." And in that small sentence, everything was different, because that necklace had become integral to Kody's identity. When it went missing, it felt like something more had broken open. Mary, meanwhile, hardly said a word that day, but the expression on her face, that wide silent gaze across the room, spoke volume. It wasn't shock, it was comprehension, as if she'd been waiting for something to crack. And Robyn, she took it personally. She interpreted the lost necklace as an ill omen, a harbinger that something holy was gone. Later, in a quiet moment, she was quoted as saying, "He's not protected anymore." Perhaps it seems odd, this notion that a necklace can carry such emotional weight. But for this family, symbolism was paramount. Each small indication was a measure of faith, control, or destiny. And that's where things get really bizarre, because the necklace turned up a few days later. No one knew how, or at least, no one owned up to it. It turned up on a nightstand, in one of the Arizona houses. But here's the fact that ran silent shivers through the wives. The clasp was broken, and the pendant had a tiny crack, like it had been stepped on or squashed. Kody would not comment on it on film. He simply wore it again. The next filming session. No comment, no nod, just that same symbol resting against his chest, a little battered but still present, perhaps a metaphor for everything else that was crumbling. And if you examine it closely, in raw footage from that episode, you can hardly miss it. The thin line of that crack shining in studio light. To the audience, nothing. But to all who knew what had gone on off stage, it was a sign that even symbols of control may shatter. And yet, the question lingers. Who actually discovered that necklace? And why did nobody ever talk about it again? Following the necklace debacle, something quietly changed in the Sister Wives universe. The narrative wasn't so much about lost jewelry anymore. It was about meaning, about ownership, about what each of them had lost, and what they were quietly attempting to take back. Those necklaces had represented Kody's leadership, his faith, his feeling of spiritual authority for years. But when one broke, when it came back broken and still, it was something else, a reflection of what each wife had been holding all along. Christine, always the one to find freedom in knowledge, regarded it as a sign. She went on to say during an interview, it was like a weight lifted, like even the things that held him together could break. And that made me realize, maybe I could too. Her words hit deeper than she likely intended, because for her, that realization became the beginning of release. The moment she stopped seeing herself through Kody's eyes, and started seeing herself through her own. Janelle, the peacekeeper, did it differently. She perceived it as closure, of a sort. For her, the necklaces were always symbolic of Kody's fixation on symbolism, whereas she was more pragmatic. When it snapped, she didn't perceive loss, she perceived truth. The truth that at times what we believe keeps us united, in fact keeps us trapped. And Mary, her response was the quietest, but maybe the deepest. She never spoke about it publicly, but fans saw her mood shift. The lengthy, wordless stares, the thoughtful pauses in interviews. It was as if she'd found solace in seeing the thing that had represented her anguish lose its strength. The necklace, once invincible, was now imperfect. Then there was Robyn, still holding on to the belief that it meant something supernatural. But even she couldn't suppress the concern in her eyes when Kody wore it once more, broken but unrevealed. It was as if she knew that by playing it whole again, it would not become so. And throughout all this, Kody said nothing. He continued to wear that necklace, as if nothing ever happened. The cameras rolled, the storylines progressed, but the atmosphere was different. The wives no longer looked at the necklace, they looked at what it stood for. Control, power, faith, fragility. It was no longer just jewelry, it was the specter of their common past, the tangible expression of everything that held them together, and eventually destroyed them. In a sense, the wives had taken back the meaning, not by removing the necklace, but by depriving it of its power. It no longer dictated who they were. It no longer dictated who he was. And that's the subtle tragedy and victory of this tale. Occasionally the symbols we revere lose their enchantment, and through that loss we finally discover ourselves. But here's the eerie question that haunts. If the necklaces no longer identify Kody, then what does? And what is the outcome when a man's identity, constructed from power, religion, and image, slowly starts to crumble? Some lose their faith silently, others lose it on national television. One camera shot, one confessional booth at a time. For Kody Brown, it did not happen overnight. It was not one fight, one breakup, or one failed reconciliation. It was a slow disintegration, 1,000 little fissures developing behind that confident grin. And for those who were listening, the warning signs were there the moment that necklace came back, shattered. He attempted to behave the same way, naturally. The stern voice, the sweeping pronouncements, the declarations that he still lived in a family, bound by something higher. But his voice had broken. There was a shake in his voice now, the sort that occurs when someone's verity is starting to collapse. In interviews, he began to speak of loyalty rather than love, of rules rather than relationships, of being misunderstood, as though the more he lost control of the people in his life, the harder he held on to the things that made him feel powerful. The necklaces became his lifeline, not to faith, but to identity. They reminded him of who he believed he was. But symbols won't keep a person together indefinitely. The fans started to notice the trend. The man who used to speak authoritatively now tripped over his own lips. His eyes flickered more. His hands nervously played with the chains on his neck during interviews. Even the wives, those once quiet women sitting beside him, spoke more readily, no longer revolving around his rule. And in those little changes, the unraveling started. Christine's exit was the loudest resonance of it, the moment that made millions of people aware the cracks weren't symbolic anymore. When she quit, it was as if she removed with her the last illusion of equanimity. The necklaces, which were previously regarded as his sign of toughness, now appeared to be signs of denial. Mary's silence spoke volumes. Janelle's independence became visible. Robyn's tears turned from faith to fear. Each reaction reflected a different chapter of Kody's internal collapse. And here's the quiet truth. No one wanted to say on camera. The necklaces had stopped representing connection long ago. They had become reminders of loss. Each time he wore one, it wasn't power he felt. It was the weight of everything slipping away. That's what shattered him. Not the cameras, not the critics, not even the wives, but the knowledge that the symbols he based his universe on no longer could shield him. The faith he used to wear around his neck had become a mirror, showing him the emptiness he was so desperately trying to conceal. And in that mirror, for the first time, Kody Brown saw what the world had been seeing all along. The man behind the myth, the leader without followers, the husband without a home. But this isn't where it stops, because what followed after the unraveling altered everything. All of these narratives constructed around heartbreak ultimately turn towards healing, even if that healing doesn't look like it should have. When the cameras started to dim, and the lights went down on the formerly unbreakable Brown family, something incredible began to occur in the silence. The din of judgment, the turbulence of online arguments, the perpetual stress of being seen, it all began to melt. And in the silence, the women Mary, Janelle, Christine, and even Robyn began to find themselves again without Kody. Christine stepped first into the light. She laughed again, Not that laugh that fills a room for the cameras, but that laugh that fills a soul. You could see it in her new house, in her new energy, in the way she talked about love, not as something she lost, but something she finally knew. Janelle did it in her own style. She didn't proclaim her independence or make loud proclamation. She just lived it, creating her independence, standing tall, and quietly demonstrating that strength doesn't have to have a spotlight. Mary's healing was introspective, slower, but for the first time in years, her silence was not oppressive. It was peaceful. She discovered peace in isolation, the sort of peace that occurs when you no longer pursue approval and instead cultivate your own value. Even Robyn, the most committed to the original vision, softened. She didn't lose her faith. She reinterpreted it. She spoke less about perfection and more about development, because perhaps, ultimately even she came to understand that love is not supposed to be contained. It's supposed to grow. And Kody, he did not find redemption in grand gestures or apologies on TV. His redemption started in the cracks, the same cracks that terrified him. He learned with time that being broken is not the same as being finished. The necklaces remain, somewhere in a drawer or box, silent reminders of a complicated history, but their significance is different. They hold no power, guilt, or symbolism anymore. They're just reminders that even the most controlling narratives can be revised. The legacy of the Brown family won't be solely about polygamy, heartache, or reality television. It will be about progress, rebirth, and the strength to release. Because sometimes the strongest change isn't caught on tape. It occurs when the lights go down, and reality finally gets to breathe. And perhaps that's what the tale of Sister Wives was all along teaching us. That recovery isn't about returning. It's about stepping forward, lighter, freer, and unafraid to shine. And so as the credits roll, one question lingers. When the icons dissolve and the tales conclude, what aspects of ourselves are we at last courageous enough to reclaim?